Hello one more time, everybody. It's Jeremy Vaeni, and I have a costume change because I didn't really like what I had to say about racism. When I tried to record it the first time, I just thought it was not enough. And I thought what I did for the last video was probably too much. So I'm breaking them up and redoing so that nothing gets lost in the shuffle. And this, I swear, will be the last video on this. And then we will Leaving Neverland forever. But first, let me get to some recurring concerns I see not just in the comments of this series of shows, but also I've seen just online elsewhere. Let's see if we can't do away with this crap right up front. The first concern goes like this. But you're a fan. Of course you defend him. And while I feel like I've answered that enough in the series of these videos, it still keeps coming up, this idea that because you're a fan of something, you would defend it. And that can be true, and I'm sure it is true, of the millions of people who love Michael Jackson. Some of them are going to defend him no matter what. So, but that's not me. If there were real evidence that he were guilty of this, I would go with that, and I would stop listening to him. And even after doing these videos, it would be a shame, but that's what it is. Like, being a human being you don't override being a human being by being a fan of someone's music or dance. Like, that just is silly. But being a fan is what makes me want to look into it, right? So that is why I would bother to know any of the background about these accusers, the other accusers, the court case and all that stuff. That's because I'm a fan. And that's why I can remain a fan, because I have done that work. That's the way it works. Which gets into concern number 2, which goes like this. But you still haven't seen the documentary, so you can't comment on it. And no, actually, as I've been making the case all the way along here, that's not how propaganda works. You don't watch a propaganda film to debunk a propaganda film when you know it's propaganda going into it. And you would know it's propaganda going into it if you'd done your homework. So, actually, let's reverse that. You can't comment on this documentary until you've done your homework, right? Like, why does that only work for the Michael Jackson fans? It doesn't work the other way around. You don't need to know anything about these two individuals or the cases or why this is happening at all. Like, nothing. You don't have to do anything, but I do? No. But having said that, I also don't need to see the film because I don't want to see the finished product. Why do that when you can watch the dress rehearsal? And the dress rehearsal is Wade Robson going on, the Today Show or whatever, being interviewed by Matt Lauer in 2013, where he first spoke publicly about his accusations. And if you go back to that, what I am calling a dress rehearsal, it's pretty clear he's lying. Like, I don't know how he looks in the film other than what I've seen in the trailer, but in that interview, all of his body language, the words that he's using, they all they don't speak to any sort of truth. They speak to a guy making stuff up. And if you really want to drive that point home, I wish I knew off the top of my head, there's an Australian body language expert who did a 2-part breakdown of Wade's body language and language in that documentary. And his conclusion is Wade's lying. So, but you don't even need to watch those videos. Just watch the interview, and you tell me if that is truthful or not. And in fact, there's another video out there that somebody posted of Wade Robson denying these allegations from his childhood on up through the years, on up past Michael Jackson's death. And you just watch the difference in his body language in all of those videos compared to the 2013 video. It's like, as my wife Carol noted, it's like his body language and his verbalization is completely free, as if he is speaking normally in the other videos. And in the accusation video, he sounds like he's making it up, or it's like Like he raises an eyebrow. He does all of these gestures that are defensive posturing and shrugging off the question like it has no emotional weight to it at all. And like he doesn't even believe what's about to come out of his mouth. So he's had a few years to perfect that. Maybe he put forward a different version of himself in Leaving Neverland. I don't know. The third thing I keep seeing is the tired cliche, if there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, no, I just said if you had done your homework, you would know that smoke that's not real, that's an illusion. That's like when, heat hits the pavement and then wafts in front of you, but there's actually not smoke there. That's what you're looking at. The real smoke-fire connection is the money trail, of course, which is that in the first case in 1993, clearly we have all the video evidence you would need and audio evidence of the father of Jordy Chandler doing this, concocting a story, forcing his kid, drugging his kid essentially, and forcing him to confess. And then in the Gavin Arvizo thing, it's like, these are like hooligan kids with a criminal mom who somehow claim Michael abducted them. I don't even think people know what the full charges were of that. They just know that Michael Jackson was on trial, the people who don't care. So let me fill you in. It wasn't just that he was on trial for molesting this boy. He was on trial for abducting the family and holding them hostage after the Martin Bashir documentary. And of course, there's video of them all going to the mall and having fun, and none of it made sense. So this was fairly obviously a criminal mom / sons doing her bidding, and they lost, So the smoke is not what you think it is. There is another type of smoke, which we're going to be talking about shortly, which is racism, which I think is, to my mind, fairly obviously, of course, is part of the criminal justice system. And Tom Sneddon and company really wanted to get Michael Jackson. So the smoke is that they did everything they could, raided his home, made him look as guilty as possible, over and over, changed the laws so that there's no statute of limitations in California on molestation accusations. All this stuff specifically to get Michael Jackson, and it still didn't work. So the fourth one I keep seeing is that nobody would make this up. Who would, in their right mind, would make up such detailed, gory, disgusting allegations and then act it out in front of us? To which I reply, have you ever seen The Human Centipede? I mean, people make really disgusting things up and act them out all the time. But also, if it turns out that Jussie Smollett, after his heartfelt interview of saying, I would never lie, why would I lie about this? To lie about this is to, and then he goes through the history of what it would mean for a black man, especially to lie about this stuff, about his allegedly having been attacked by Trumpers and put a noose around his neck and all that stuff. If he hoaxed all of that, and it looks like he did, there's your answer. It can happen. So it's funny how even if that turns out to be that he was making it up, you notice how the media was pretty much on that angle from the beginning. People were just saying, he has to be making this up. This can't have happened. And that would, they're willing to go that way with him, but not with Wade Robson and James Safechuck. No, these are white people we're talking about. They don't make stuff up. And lastly, of the concerns I see out there is, but Michael Jackson shared a bed with these kids, so he's guilty. And we've got to treat everyone who's an adult as equals. I saw Dr. Drew saying this. He doesn't get a special pass just because he's Michael Jackson. I think he does. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, you are correct. Under the law, no adult should have a pass. So if he molested kids, he does not get a pass. But I think the reason that, on paper, if you look at just grown man sleeping in bed with kids, hanging out with kids who are not his own, all of that does sound suspicious on paper. But the reason that he, quote unquote, got away with it for so long is because we understood his personality. And by all accounts, that was his personality, right? So the whole thing of, I never had a childhood, I'm childlike at heart, all of this stuff comes out through all of his expression and his creative expression and all of that. Like, it's clear to see. It's clear to see in his home videos that this is true. So, and he is rich, so he can afford for this to remain true, right? Like, this isn't like someone who is forced to go to therapy because they better get their act together or they're going to be homeless. They're not going to be able to hold a job. They're going to not have relationships. This is a guy who's rich and can afford to like build Neverland and live in that fantasy, live in that dream, for better or for worse. And ultimately, I think, unfortunately, it was for worse. But he, by his money and his ability to remain in a fantasy bubble, does make him different. And so I think that's why it was allowed to go on without people really jumping on, oh, he's got to be a pedophile suspicion. They jumped on, he's weird, he's a weirdo, he's eccentric. But the pedophile thing didn't happen until Jordy Chandler's dad. But that might have been the thing that everyone was thinking, and so it was really easy to believe, like, But you know what? When that happened, I think it was Entertainment Weekly or Newsweek, but I think it was Entertainment Weekly, where the very week that Michael Jackson came back to America after being accused of this, after the police were like wanting to investigate him, that very week, the cover story, and I think it was Entertainment Weekly, was something like, "Will he come back?" It was a big front page cover story about, will Michael Jackson even bother to come back to America, or will he pull a Roman Polanski and stay out of America? And he came back like by Friday, right? So it's true. If you, to my mind, that was, I'm not guilty. If he were guilty, he would never have done that. So then when people say like, well, he paid the kid off. Well, yeah, because his lawyers told him to. Like, just get this out of the way and go on and make a ton of money. $20 million out of your insurance isn't going to affect you at all. And it was a bad move. PR-wise, he never recovered from that. But if you're looking for like, that's the reason, no, because when he was out of the country, he didn't even know that paying this off would work, right? Like, it's all a gamble. Coming back to the country, paying the money, it's all a gamble. So if you're guilty, why take the chance? Just stay out of the country and be like, I'm innocent from every other country. I'm innocent in Switzerland. Okay. Now let's get into the real racism issue here. And we've heard various versions of racism, and a lot of people, and they're true. Like all this stuff, most of the stuff I think we've heard by way of racism is true. Like I said about the Jussie Smollett thing a minute ago. But let's really zoom in here on two issues. One related to everything I've been talking about in these videos, which is that if you're doing emotive documentaries, if the directors with their best intentions are going out and producing things that they can relate to, and it's their journey of discovery, who is the person that starts out on that journey of discovery? So if it's white people who have this built-in racism that we are born into in our culture, and sense of privilege and all of that, then it's hard to say that even with your best intentions, you're not going to just like pick black people to go after. And then because you're unconscious of that, when people say, wait a minute, you're picking all these black people to go after, what about all these white guys who do the same thing that you're not covering? You're hiding, you're saying out loud, but no, I'm not racist. I would never do that. But the racism is built in, you see? And so it's really hard to make the case that what started off as a good thing, victims speaking up about being victimized by famous people, it's hard to not see that this is taking a turn toward black people. Let's put the eye on them. And what I'm saying is, I think for the creative people who are doing it, the directors, the writers, it's not necessarily conscious racism, it's unconscious racism. It's how they pick their subjects. So the thing I don't believe about racism, the one little bit of angle I don't buy into is, well, if one is innocent, they're all innocent. Because they're going after like Bill Cosby and R. Kelly due to unconscious or conscious racism, that means these folks are innocent? No, that doesn't mean they're innocent. That means that the focus of attention is on them because of racism. And the reason that Michael Jackson has remained such a target over the years, follow me down this road. In America, we don't have a real culture. We simply don't. We're a quote-unquote new country that was founded on destroying the people who were here and implementing European society over that. And it's a hodgepodge of stuff, right? We call it a melting pot. But basically it's a hodgepodge of rogue bandits, other countries coming together and forming this thing, putting on paper freedoms that the very people who were here before us already lived. They were living in the very freedoms that we, put down in paper and go, isn't this amazing? We have this on paper. Like, yeah, we were doing that, and then you killed us and enslaved us. So America doesn't have a real culture. It has a pop culture. This is why we're so media-centric, media-focused, and me. It's all of this egotism and all this look at me, flashy stuff. Over here, to divert our attention from, well, probably the things that we know we're missing inside. And then we keep telling ourselves what those things are through the arts. And then we feel something. Wash, rinse, repeat. So we don't have a culture, we have a pop culture. And we have racism. And now we have a black man who is the king of pop. So while we can say he's the king of popular music, what we really know he's the king of is popular culture. He affected the way we dressed, the way we listened to music, the way we danced. He perfected everything he did creatively. And he was an enigma. He was a riddle, and we don't like riddles. We like answers. He was black, he was white, he was male, he was female. He seemed to be shallow, like a bubbly, shallow, like, but he had this amazing depth that came through him in his art. So he is the perfection of question in a real way. He is also the king of pop culture. And he's black, and that's a problem in a racist country. So some of this is unconscious. Some of it is really conscious. He was afraid, of course, fans know this, that Sony, someone in the Sony corporation or bunch of people were out to get him because they wanted to murder him for his catalog, that he owned like half of Sony's the rights to Sony's recordings or whatever it is. I don't know what the verbiage of that stuff is, but he owned half the catalog of Sony. And apparently he did this by going straight to Japan, straight to the Japanese owners of Sony and getting it that way. He went around like Tommy Mottola and the American establishment of Sony. If I'm incorrect about that, please correct me in the comments. But I believe that is what happened. And as a result, white people lost power. And you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to make white people lose power. Or money, really. So they were out to get him. And he knew it. And even the Jackson family, at least a number of them have voiced this, that they believe he was murdered. I don't know that I would go that far, but That's for them to understand. I don't know. I'm not, what would I know about that? I don't know. But I do know that, again, American culture is pop culture. Michael Jackson is the king of pop culture. That is a problem. So we've got to get this guy. We've got to take him down a notch. And that is on top of our natural inclination to want to take anybody off the pedestal. Right? Like, this is what we do. We put people on a pedestal and then we knock them down. We've been doing this since Jesus, right? And I'm not saying Michael Jackson is Jesus, although I believe there was a rainbow in Harlem on the day he died, so you might want to look into that. That's a joke. Don't negate everything I'm doing just because I make jokes. Okay, so these are the issues, right? This is the problem. It's not just that he's eccentric. It's not just that he's childlike and he sleeps in the same bedroom with kids, even though his bedroom is like a 2-floor apartment and his bed is a massive bed. It's like, these are all things that to normal adults are gross. But Michael Jackson was not a normal adult. And normally when you say they're not a normal adult and they do these things, you do want to go to, well, maybe he diddled kids. But with Michael Jackson, again, he's not that person. You know what I mean? Like, if he's not the average adult who doesn't know or doesn't care about these conventions, you know what I mean? Like, I either do adult things and be an adult, or I'm molesting kids. Like, this dichotomy doesn't apply to him. The thing of, I am one or the other. I'm either being a normal adult in society and fitting in, or if I do all of this stuff for kids with kids, it's because I want to molest them. That dichotomy, that thinking, does not necessarily apply to him, for the reasons that I outlined in the beginning. Because we know that he was childlike, we know that he lost his childhood, blah, 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 and he's rich enough to keep himself in that bubble. So that does not mean... So it doesn't equate to depravity, is what I'm saying, in the way that it would for a normal person. Not necessarily. So the necessarily is key, because it can. Everything I'm saying can be true, and Michael can be a pedophile at the end of the day, and then I'm wrong. However, to get there, you need evidence. And we've seen the evidence. And it was thrown out. So, and in that trial, they practically prosecuted the 1993 piece of it all over again in a court of law. So 93 and 2005 put together by the prosecutor was a losing case. So if Michael Jackson did not molest these boys who he was accused of, he probably didn't molest these other boys who testified that he didn't abuse them either. I mean, you can't say that there's a pattern of abuse when actually there's a pattern of accusers being knocked down. And you want to say, like, well, they're being knocked down in a court of law and all that because Michael Jackson is rich and powerful and a star. But again, the rules don't apply to him necessarily in a positive way. They also don't necessarily apply to him in a negative way because of who he is. And by that I mean, this can't be a case of just a rich guy walking because he's rich or rich and famous. Because people suspected him. They suspect him so much that even after death, they're looking for a reason to make him a pedophile. Right? So there is no jury of his peers. There's a jury of people who have to decide if his eccentricities equal pedophilia. And they decided no when presented with the facts and having to be forced to sit there and watch both sides. But if we're not forced to watch both sides and we're just watching a documentary that's 4 hours long that is one-sided, what do you think you're going to walk away feeling? That's the setup here. The question is, why are you feeling it? Is it because he really is a pedophile, or is it because of everything that we've talked about in these now 4 episodes? And let me just leave on this note, just about how we watch media, because this keeps bugging me. And it's not Dan Reed's fault, actually, this piece of it. It's just how the media is. When you do a TV interview or a radio interview or a podcast, anyone who's a podcaster or a host of anything knows that you get from someone who is like actually selling something and going through a PR firm, you get from them a list of questions. Like, the PR people assume you don't know anything about this person. Like, if it's an author or a musician or whatever, you don't know anything about them. So here's a little bit about them. Here's an article, about them. And here's a list of potential questions that you could ask them in your interview. And so when you see Dan Reed on TV going on interview after interview after interview, and they're asking him the exact same questions, that's why. But you notice Dan Reed has to sit there and look like he's pondering, like, I'm just thinking this off the top of my head. No. I mean, just consider it. Consider how unconscious we are of how the news is run and how interviews are done and the way we consume them. He's done the same interview after interview after interview, and they're likely based on these questions that his publicist handed these talking heads, these balloon bubble heads that just sit there and go, Dan, what about? So there is no, even in talking about this publicly, there's not a whole lot of thought going on. It's just mechanical. It's just, let's get this PR stunt over with. And then it's the same thing, in a way, when like Taj Jackson or the Jacksons or whoever goes on and defends Michael Jackson. The talking head's job, like if we really cared about this subject, if we really cared, their job would be to ask these questions. And then Taj Jackson says, well, here's the evidence against that. And then the talking head might be like, if they really were into a conversation, be like, wow, I didn't think of that. I didn't know that. I didn't do a Google search. I'm going to go do that. And then we're going to do a part 2 where we investigate your claims against Wade Robson. We're going to go investigate those right now. And we're going to come back with a piece about what we find. But they never do that, do they? They just go, so what's your opinion, Taj? What's your take, Taj? Okay, he said it out loud. Now we're going to move on to the next thing. And don't forget to watch HBO on Sunday, because make up your own mind. What? Like, but we are so used to this. This is just the way the media works, and we're so used to unthoughtful, robotic, fake conversation with bubbleheads who have been handed questions that they don't even have to think about to move on to the next subject because it's all about advertising dollars, that we don't know. We don't even realize how phony all of this is, this pop culture of ours. Which might be another reason people didn't particularly care for Michael Jackson being the king of pop. Because there was a depth there. There was a depth to it. There was something about him where he could take the essence of what other people were doing at the time in music and refine it and make it perfect. So he would make the perfect pop song. He would make the perfect disco song. He would make the perfect New Jack Swing. Right? Whatever he touched was perfected. And you don't get that way unless you've got a depth to you. Like, you want to talk about emotive resonance. This is a guy who could tick off all your chords, whether you were black, white, Asian, whatever, all around the world. And he could do all of the big flashy show. He could do all of that stuff to perfection. But that's not what made him the king. What made him the king is that if he were to not do any of that flashy stuff and just stand on a stage with a microphone, he would still grab everyone's attention. There would still be 100,000 people packing a stadium because there's just something about him that was so enigmatic that it almost reminds us of what we're lacking. Right? Like, all right, maybe I am a bit of a fan. I admit it. But think about it. Just think about, like, what is it that made him different from every other artist to where we still care this much about him this long after his death? And it's not like Elvis, where, like, Elvis died and then there were a bunch of impersonators, man, who put on the chops and the whole thing. It's not about, like, I want to be that person. I'm going to put on the costume and marry people at a drive-through window in Vegas or something like that. That's going to be my decrepit, horrible life. No offense, Elvis impersonators. Okay, maybe that is offensive, but you get the point. It's not like that, right? That's not the thing that we're preserving. We're not preserving the imitation of Michael Jackson. There's something about him that spoke to the human potential, but that also refused to cave to our sense of conformity. And so he became a taboo. And he embraced that, too. It wasn't just like he became a taboo. He embraced that. And in this country, you don't get to do that when you're black. And that's a fact. All of this was never meant to be to white society. Right? This is all a problem. And if you think for 1 second that this is not an issue, well, you can't. I was going to say, look no further than how we went from Barack Obama to Donald Trump because of the reflexive white reaction to black power. But I think that's pretty obvious. I'm hoping everyone understands that. So, I mean, that's the President of the United States. And now we're talking about the king of culture. The king of pop culture. King of our culture, man, from, the early 1980s on, who was a black man. You don't think that's a problem? It's a problem. So if we're at the place now where we're going to just do these emotive documentaries, we're just going to tug on the heartstrings, we're going to make you feel, please, white people, I beg you, look to why it is that you want to focus on black artists. Is it really random? Is it really just you threw a dart at a board and you thought, oh, well, we'll see where it lands. This will be interesting. Because if it is, then we should be seeing a lot of hair metal bands from the 80s come up, right? Like the whole Me Too thing is like, well, I'm pretty sure there was a lot of like cocaine-fueled rapes and misogyny going on in rock and roll with white people. I'm sure there are plenty of hair bands that we could go after. Where are their stories? Why don't we care more? And there are some people that we know, had sex with minors, like David Bowie, right? And I believe Mick Jagger, right? And we're not outraged about that. So, but R. Kelly, that's an outrage. I mean, shouldn't they all be outrages? Isn't it awful all around? Isn't like any sort of taking advantage of somebody else, forcing yourself on them? Isn't that nothing? What about those Bryan Singer allegations? What about, hey, Woody Allen again? What about Roman Polanski? Is he up for an Oscar again? I'm pretty sure Louis C.K. is still performing, making that comeback. I mean, we did go after Louis C.K., but he's allowed to come back. Pretty sure Brett Kavanaugh is now a Supreme Court justice. How'd that go? And I mean, whether he raped a woman or not, his performance in that hearing was unbecoming of a Supreme Court justice. But that doesn't matter. Because white establishment. That's why. So shut up, Jer. Shut up. You're a white guy. What do you know? You know the sad thing about this is that there's not one black person watching this who doesn't already know all of this is true. There's not one Indian out there who doesn't know that all of this is true. And there's not one white person who on some level doesn't know that all of this is true. But thanks to our friend white privilege, we get to be unconscious of it while they're fully conscious of it, and we get to judge whether their consciousness of it is valid or not. That's what privilege gets you. You get to judge those things. And then your judgment becomes the law of the land. Until we've dealt with all of this, I don't ever want to see that hashtag woke again. And now, it's time to breathe out the bad and breathe in the good. Let's leave Leaving Neverland where it belongs. In the dustbin of commercial fraud. Isn't that what it is? But we're not going to do that, are we? We're going to just keep going on with this crap. And so the world turns, my friends. This is why we can't do anything really about it externally, or not much. There's not much we can do about it externally. But as long as we remain true to ourselves, true within ourselves, and express that outwardly, this is the change we're looking for. So, there you go. You're welcome for the somber note. Take care, and truly thank you for watching.